Welcome to another Founder Wisdom podcast with Elise Buckle. With us today, she is co-founder and co-director at She Changes Climate. We're going to talk about climate inclusion, sustainability, ESG, everything in between. This podcast is brought to you by podpire.com. If you want to start, scale, or be invited to a podcast like this one, I can help you with that. I can help you find sponsors for podcasts and so forth. Podpires are podcasting agency. A bunch of people use podcasts to meet new people, to learn. Like myself, that's my great obsession, interviewing 15 CEOs a day, and basically get leads, get subscribers, grow their communities, and even get clients. So if you want to start or scale a podcast, go to podpire.com. Elise, I'm glad to have you on. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a bit more about what you're up to nowadays?
Thank you so much, Charles, and nice to be with you and everyone today. So we co-founded She Changes Climate just before COP26 when we realized that the COP presidency team had only men on the team. And so we felt they were missing diversity. And we started with just an online campaign. And our open letter was signed by hundreds of politicians, CEOs, climate activists, human rights activists. And it just started to grow and grow, and people were so excited about this initiative. They started writing to us from everywhere around the world. Many women were actually really depressed about the state of the world, but at the same time really passionate and hopeful about the role of women leadership to solve this climate crisis. It's a planetary emergency we're facing for climate, people, and nature. And we believe that by having at least 50% of women at all levels of decision-making, we can really make a difference. So thank you so much for inviting us. And just also to say, our main client is Mother Earth.
Love it. Talking about the inclusion, I think COP28 is not inclusive at all. What does COP mean? I know what a COP means, they arrest people, but like other than that, is it like they're going to arrest 28 people? Like what does COP mean?
So COP means Conference of the Parties to the Climate Convention and to the Paris Agreement, which was ratified by most countries around the world. This is to keep us on a safe trajectory below +2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees of temperature increase. And this is what the science is telling us. We have to stay below 1.5 degrees, otherwise we might be facing irreversible impacts and what we call tipping points. We are actually already reaching some tipping points and planetary boundaries in terms of the Arctic ice that is melting, the Amazon forest that is drying up and might become a savanna by 2050. So we are already close to the limit of what our planet Earth can carry. And so this is really urgent. And the 28th conference is happening this year in Dubai, the first 2 weeks of December in the UAE. So this is highly controversial, as you know, because the president of COP28, Sultan El Jaber, is also the CEO of ADNOC, which is the largest oil company in the country and the 5th oil reserve in the world. But we feel we have to be there. We have to make our voices heard as women leaders committed to climate action. Many youth organizations and indigenous leaders have also decided to go, because if we don't go, we are just leaving the space to the fossil fuel industry to take over on all these important decisions that we have to take right now for the future of humankind.
And that leader of the COP, don't you think he's there to actually greenify his own company? Because I mean, in this day and age, I don't think that level of hypocrisy would be tolerated. So isn't he there to kind of make his business better with all that oil and potentially pivot onto something better?
So this is the big question. And we are there also as women leaders supporting the women on the inside of the UAE government that are trying to restore environmental integrity, that are trying to save the multilateral process. Obviously, Sultan El Jaber has some vested interest in this. He's also trying to shift his investment and the investment of the country, but it's not enough. We know that he's also the CEO of Masdar, which is an energy company. And so they are actually investing $15 billion a year in renewable energy access, clean energy access for all, energy saving, etc. But in comparison, they're still investing $150 billion a year in fossil fuel industry expansion. So this is 10 times more. So obviously, this is also what we are denouncing, this double language. And we really support other women who are inside the UAE presidency, for example, Hana El Hashimi and Razan Al Mubarak, who's the high-level champion for UNFCCC and also president of IUCN. We wanted Sultan El Jaber to step down, or at least to step down from his role as the CEO of ADNOC if he wants to be co-president. He hasn't done that. So what we're trying to do now is really put the spotlight on the ones that are doing some good work for the environmental integrity of the process, and not just focusing on him. His role is important, but he's not the only one who will be steering the process. The countries that are attending COP28 are very important. This is the first time that countries are going to do a global stock take on everything they have done since they have ratified the Paris Agreement. So this is also where we want to shine some light on who's doing the right thing, and doing some naming and faming of the leaders who are moving very fast on the energy transition, but also naming and shaming the ones that are not doing enough. We know already that the United States, the EU, but also China, Brazil, South Africa, the emerging economies are not doing enough in terms of emission reduction. And a lot of small islands and African countries are really calling on the large emitters to do a lot more on mitigating their emissions, but also putting money on the table to help the most vulnerable countries to deal with the impacts of climate change.
It's interesting when billionaires still don't have that either self-consciousness or the budget to pay a PR team to kind of make them look good. I'm always surprised by this, and I think this type of men, they're used to just doing things, and whatever people think, they just go ahead with it, and they don't really care about like the consequences. They're used to always being said yes to. So a little accountability can never hurt, right? I'm a strong believer into accountability mechanisms. Then came to my mind, and I'd like to talk about your background, but I have a bunch of questions while listening to you. Isn't this, because if there's a picture, right, it's just like we fart on this planet all the time. There's gases everywhere. And is that going to stop when the human is going to reach a certain quality of life? That's my hypothesis. If I picture the world humans started stopping farting on this world and emitting CO2 that much, it would be because they have reached a sufficient quality of life, like you have and I have. You're in Switzerland, one of the best quality of air and quality of life in the world. But people have reached that level, and they're mature, they're somewhat happy, and most importantly, they can innovate as well. So my thesis of things is that this will stop, like maybe like in 10, 15, 20 years, when people reach a certain wealth level that will give them sufficient income to worry about other things than surviving. Do you agree with that?
Yes and no. I mean, even here in Switzerland, there's a lot of work to do for people to reduce their carbon footprint. So we also have a She Changes Climate network here in Switzerland. And actually now we're quite active on the climate legislation. There was a referendum recently. Finally, people voted yes to the CO2 legislation. There's a massive mobilization coming up on Saturday in Bern, in the capital, to push for climate ambition. And we have federal elections coming up. But actually, my country, Switzerland, is not doing enough. We are at least 5 or 10 years behind of what this country should do to fully implement the Paris Agreement, to become carbon neutral by 2050 and reduce carbon emissions by half by 2030, while at the same time restoring ecosystems and forests. nature is actually very important also to absorb the carbon emissions and also to help us to adapt to the impacts of climate change. Now, the other question you're raising is climate justice. The challenge with global warming is that the richest countries in the world, I mean, starting with the UK, Europe, but also US, Japan, the first countries that became industrial, these countries have been burning first coal and then oil and gas for many, many years. And all these carbon emissions have been captured into the atmosphere, and these emissions will stay there for many years. That means that there isn't enough space now in terms of carbon budget for the poor countries to develop with the same model. So the question is, how can the developing countries leapfrog in terms of development to meet their needs, their basic needs? Everybody wants a house and food on the table and safety for their children, safe livelihood, roof, not so many natural disasters threatening lives every day. And so this is something we all need as humankind. I believe we're all like brothers and sisters. We were all born on the same planet Earth. So now how can we help our brothers and sisters in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, to have the right to dignity, to have the right to the same level of well-being, while at the same time preserving our planet? Because if not, there's no future for nobody. This is really for everybody's children, for the next generations coming on this planet, on that same planet that we are sharing. So one question that has been discussed a lot in the COP28, for the COP28 negotiations and before as well, is the transfer of technology. How can we make sure, for example, the development of solar panels is very quick and cheap? So the good news now is solar energy is very cheap. It's actually cheaper than the fossil fuel energy. So even there is a massive lobbying from the fossil fuel industry on governments to keep their interest there in the economy. Even like that, even with all these subsidies going from government to fossil fuel industry, solar energy is still cheaper. So this is really the space for hope for countries in Africa, for example, where there is such a big potential to scale up solar energy, that everybody can have access to clean energy for their home, for their light, for homework after school, at home, for the woman to cook using solar stoves, for example. And then I think sometimes we have to unlearn and relearn. So for us as people from the West, we maybe have to unlearn what we've learned and learn from our mistakes and relearn from indigenous people, from people who had that traditional knowledge on how you preserve forests and natural resources and ocean and fishing. How do we do that? Reconnecting with nature and going back to the basic in a way of what has been working for centuries. I mean, humanity has been living in balance with the earth for so many centuries. And now, because of our GDP growth model, we have really challenged this balance between people and nature. So we need to rebalance and maybe learn from our ancestors as well on how we relate to nature.
Right. And I've had various solar farms folks on this podcast, and indeed it is cheaper. I just think that one, in big organizations, change is so hard and so costly that it can't happen like this. So these folks, they need plans, They don't need like, hey, pivot now to green energy. They need a plan, a 5-year plan of like, okay, from fossil to green. Then obviously, even if they have this plan, they will be hugely penalized. Why? Because investors, they're not that smart. They're like, yo, we're going to invest for 10, 15, 20 years. And guess what? The billions are already invested. So they're going to lose that. So they don't like that, right? They're like, hey, we made a plan 5 years ago that was going to last 20 years and we already invested all that money. So with a sad face, so I think that part of the equation needs to be factored in. But then you would obviously tell me like these folks at the top, at the helm of these companies, they're already multi-billionaires, what do they care about like losing 100 million there? And that would be a valid argument.
Yes, I mean, I really think that, well, let's be realistic. I mean, if you look at the science, it's very dark. We are really facing this planetary emergency, and there are millions of people being affected by the El Nino effect right now, with floods and drought and people dying in natural disasters. And women in particular, women are 14 times more likely to die in natural disasters. And that happened in Pakistan during the floods because women and girls didn't know how to swim. Nobody had taught them how to swim. They didn't have access to information and cell phones, and they were staying behind to look after the babies and the elderlies. So this is also why we think women need to be at the table, because they're not just victims of climate change. When they have power, when we give them the power, they can actually scale up these solutions very quickly because they do care about their communities and the future of their children. So we see women as actors of change. Now, change is happening. Change is happening. Actually, there are more women on board of companies. There are more women in politics. There's also a lot of change in the energy system. There's a sharp increase in solar energy use. There's so much pressure now on fossil fuel industry. I mean, look at all these protests, and even the banks are starting to disinvest from fossil fuel because it's too risky for their reputation. There are also citizens taking banks or governments to court because they're not doing enough on climate. So a lot is happening in the society, in the energy system, and also at the community level. The question is it happening fast enough? I think it's not happening fast enough. And this is why, as She Changes Climate, we're also part of a broader movement, which is called the Dandelion Movement. We want to get to 2 billion people to join the movement, and we want to get more women on board to make sure they put climate first on their agenda as a top priority, because we are in a crisis and we need more women leaders who are making the planetary emergency the top priority every day in their communities, at school, in the hospital, at the parliament, in the companies, everywhere. We think that women can solve this crisis, and there is hope because we know what the solutions are. The solutions are in front of us. It's scaling up renewable energy, phasing out fossil fuels very quickly, unlocking finance, both from private sector and public sector, investing finance also in resilience and the loss and damage fund. That's very important. Putting nature at the heart of the climate agenda, restoring forest, ocean, ecosystems. As I said, nature is really at the heart of it. And also inclusion and diversity. If we make some space for everybody to be around the table, youth, women, indigenous people, we will find these systemic solutions that work for everyone. And also by having all the citizens, all the types of actors around the table, we make sure they're actually going to implement the plan. So this is why inclusion and diversity is absolutely essential for this systemic transformation of society. So again, there is hope. The solutions are there. It's just we have to move faster, much faster. And we're very, very proud to be part of the Dandelion Women movement for climate justice. For you to know the story, the dandelion flower is one of the few flowers that grow on the 7 continents. It grows everywhere. So whether you like it or not, it does grow everywhere. It's quite perseverant, and it's actually very resilient. It can really deal with many different types of weather events. And the dandelion flower is, it's this yellow color. It's also a symbol of hope. It's also the sign that we can still dream about a brighter future. These flowers grow after the winter. They grow up in the springtime. And so we are really working with so many women leaders from around the world with this spirit of stubborn optimism. This is what Christiana Figueres is using. We have to be optimistic, and really our capacity to dream and to imagine a brighter future is the best renewable energy source actually to change society. If we stop dreaming, there won't be any change. So let's dream together, and let's also turn these dreams into action.
Love it, Elise. I'm going to invite you for round two because we didn't have time to discuss the organization of that, and you're full of knowledge. So thank you for sharing that with us today. Where can people find out more about you?
You can look at our website, shechangesclimate.org. Please do join the movement. You can join our partners group. We have a newsletter as well. We have also a mentoring program, which we have just launched, and already almost 300 people have joined, both mentors and mentees. So these are people who want to work in the climate space, but they don't know where to start. We are going to convene an online summit on the 21st of November, which is going to be open to everyone, very inclusive as a pre-COP moment. And so you're also welcome to join that. And yes, let's stay in touch. I'm also available on LinkedIn. You can find my profile on LinkedIn. And we are also recruiting She Changes Climate ambassadors for next year. We have already 15 ambassadors in 15 countries, and we're going to look for leaders in more countries. So please stay in touch with us. Thank you.
I'm Charles Cormier, host of founderwisdompodcast.com.